Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pestana. Can losing beavers in our environment leave us with profound consequences? Our special guest today, Ben Goldfarb, is here to share his new book, Eager: The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. So Ben Goldfarb is an independent conservation journalist. He is the winner of the 2019 Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. His book, Eager: The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter, was selected by the Washington Post as one of the 50 notable works of nonfiction. Science News called it Favorite Science Book of 2018, and Booklist called it the Top 10 Science Technology Book of 2018. So let's welcome to the show, Ben Goldfarb.
Thanks a lot for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What even inspired you to be interested in beavers?
I don't know. They just, came to me in a dream one night. I don't know. I grew up in New York. I spent a lot of time hiking, camping, fishing. So I was always around beavers. Had kind of a baseline interest in them and appreciation for what they do. And then back in 2014, I was living in Seattle, working as a journalist, and I was looking for things to write about. And somebody sent me a flyer for a beaver workshop, and I had no idea what a beaver workshop was, but I knew that I had to attend. It sounded like a story, so I went to this beaver workshop near Seattle, and it was just one scientist after another getting up to say their piece about why beavers were so important for salmon habitat, and why they were important for fighting wildfires, and why they were important for preventing droughts and filtering out pollution and capturing carbon and doing all these wonderful things. And I sort of realized that day that beavers, these animals that I had kind of grown up with, weren't just a cute, fun, interesting rodent. They were really one of the primary movers and shakers in North American landscapes, and a really important partner in ecological restoration and healing the planet. So it was really that beaver workshop in 2014 that got me excited.
A beaver workshop, who would have known, right? So
That's
you
right.
don't hear about those every day, but I'm so glad that you attended. So what are some of the features about beavers that we should know about?
Yeah, I mean they're really amazing animals. Of course, they live in and around water pretty much their whole lives. They're semi-aquatic rodents, right? And they've got all kinds of cool adaptations for this watery lifestyle they have. They've got incredibly dense fur. They have as many individual hairs on a postage stamp sized patch of skin as we have on our entire head. So really thick fur. They've got a second set of eyelids, transparent eyelids they can close, sort of like goggles underwater, as well as a second set of lips that they can close behind their front teeth, so they can chew and drag branches underwater without drowning. I think that's really cool. And then, of course, the kind of the famous beaver feature that everybody recognizes is the tail, right? And the tail is really this amazing, sort of multi-purpose organ. It's a rudder while they swim. It's a kickstand out on land. It's a fat storage device. They actually put on fat for the winter in their tails. And it's an alarm system. I'm sure, anybody who's spent time around a beaver pond has heard the smack of that tail hitting the water, which they do to kind of warn other beavers about the presence of predators. So they've got all kinds of cool features for this really interesting life they have.
I understand they have orange teeth as well.
That's true. Yes, their teeth are orange because they're actually sort of chemically and structurally fortified with iron that beavers derive from their food, right? And if you're an animal that spends its whole life cutting down trees and eating bark and dragging sticks around to build dams, it helps to have really durable, strong teeth. And beavers have exactly that, thanks to that iron that is built into their teeth.
Now, do they have certain trees that they prefer to eat than others?
They do, yeah. They really like any tree in the poplar family, which would be aspen, cottonwood, birch, poplar. They also take a lot of willow as well. Pretty much any deciduous tree, trees whose leaves fall down. They do kind of avoid those evergreen conifers, but they'll take just about anything in a pinch.
So, who are the predators for beavers?
Yeah, I mean, any large carnivore is going to be pretty happy eating a beaver. Bears, wolves, cougars, coyotes will take a younger beaver, and that's why beavers build dams, right? That's their of course their most famous behavior is their dam building, and the reason for that is that out on land a beaver is kind of this fat, slow, smelly meat package, essentially, that they're going to get eaten by any carnivore. They're really in danger when they're out on land because they're kind of a little ungainly and clumsy, but they're really wonderful swimmers. So by building that dam, they just create the conditions for their own safety, right? They take that little stream and they turn it into a big pond, and suddenly they've got this, huge piece of habitat that they can explore and feed in and raise their young in. So, by building those dams, they're creating that big pond where they can be safe from all of the land-based predators who would want to eat them.
So aside from building dams, do they build anything else?
Yeah, they also build lodges. So the lodge is kind of like that's like the basic beaver housing unit, and that's typically, it's kind of this really cool pile of sticks and mud. Sometimes you see them right out in the middle of the pond, like a little island. Other times they're kind of built into the bank, a little bank lodge. And the lodge is really cool. There's kind of there are underwater tunnels that lead up into the lodge, and then in the lodge there's kind of an elevated little nesting platform or chamber, which they line with wood chips, the same stuff you put at the bottom of your hamster cage or something. And then in the lodge, that's where the beaver family lives, the beaver colony. And that's typically, two to as many as 8 or so beavers. You've got the mother and the father who kind of mate for life. And then you've got, the newborn kits, the baby beavers. You've got the 1-year-olds and the 2-year-olds. So you've got 3 kind of year classes of brothers and sisters all hanging out together, working cooperatively, teaching each other the finer points of being a beaver. So they're really wonderful cooperative breeders, and they live in these great little nuclear families that would be recognizable to a lot of people, I think.
Now, do they hibernate?
No, they don't hibernate. So in fall, they will assemble what's known as a food cache. They go around the pond, cutting lots of stems and sticks, and then they just take all of that material and they stick it, kind of near the entrance of the lodge, down at the bottom of the pond, and then they'll spend the whole winter awake and alert, kind of going from that lodge down to get the food cache, bringing them back up to the family. So you won't see them probably because at least in cold places they'll be under the ice, but they're still awake that whole time, getting that food that they assembled in the fall. So they're pretty industrious animals in that sense. They're good at planning for the future.
Well, one of the things I found in your book to be very interesting is how easy it was to find beavers during the winter. I was just so floored by that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean that food cache that they put together. Oftentimes you can see that kind of poking out of the ice. So if you see that food cache, you know that there's not only a lodge, because usually you can see the beaver lodge. You know that there are actually beavers in it, right? If the lodge was abandoned, as lodges often are, there wouldn't be that food cache. So yeah, that's definitely one way of knowing that there are beavers present. Another way is that again in cold places especially, you can almost see a little chimney smoke coming out of the top of the lodge. You get all of these hot, furry bodies piled up together in there, giving off heat. And it's, the lodge is actually sending up steam. And that was, one of the ways that early fur trappers knew that there were actually beavers in the lodge. They would see that little plume of steam coming out of the lodge from all of those warm bodies bundled up together.
Sounds like they were having a party, so.
I bet a beaver lodge in winter is a really cozy place. I mean, the lodges are amazing. They're kind of plastered with mud. The mud sort of freezes and hardens up and turns into this incredible insulation material. So there have been really cool studies, in very cold places in Canada, basically showing that, in the lodge, even as the outside temperature is, many degrees below freezing, the lodge is still above freezing because they've kind of plastered it so well with all of that insulation.
Wow, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. One thing that I was so impressed in your book, you talked about how beavers also build canals. I never knew that.
Yeah, that's a really important thing they do. We definitely think about beavers as being these amazing builders, but they're also fantastic diggers, great excavators, and they'll dig these really elaborate canal networks that go off of the pond and up into the forest. And again, that's about sort of ease of travel and security and safety, right? They can swim up one of those canals, cut down an aspen tree, and then float it back to the pond without ever getting out of the water and being vulnerable to predators. But those canals are really, they're really important from a kind of a landscape or ecosystem perspective, because they're spreading water out on the land, kind of almost hydrating or irrigating the forest. And those little canals are great habitat too. You see lots of baby fish and tadpoles living in them. They're kind of these nice slow water refuges, where all of those juvenile fish and amphibians can kind of go hang out, away from the main pond or stream. So yeah, people don't think about beavers as being great excavators, but they're like little Venetians, creating these amazing canal cities.
I thought that was so cool how they really impact the environment. And I know we've got so much to impact here with all the great things that beavers do, but I just want to give a little bit more about how important beavers are and what their life is like. So is there something that surprised you when you're doing your research about beavers?
Man, there are so many things that surprise me. I mean, I think that what's one of the things that's great about them is just how sympathetic they are. They really, they're animals that we can really relate to as humans, right? They, like us, they relentlessly modify their environment to enhance their own safety and food supply. They live in these great little nuclear families, and kind of the older siblings help in the care and upbringing of the younger siblings. In a way that a lot of human families would find relatable. They're just so much fun to watch. I mean, there's just such complexity there, of course, in their behavior. So I think that was just one of the things that surprised me when I really started digging into beavers and spending a lot of time, in and around their wetlands and ponds, was just how relatable they are. How much they reminded me of my own family, and how much kind of empathy I felt for them. And I think that's a connection that a lot of people feel with beavers. Is just they're a very understandable species for us as humans, I think.
Is there a climate that they do best in? Because I was really surprised when you talked about how they were at 12,000 feet elevation. I was like, wow, I didn't realize they'd go that high.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I live in Colorado, and and up here, I mean, you see them at 12,000 feet all the time. Just making a living up by the Continental Divide. It's really incredible. But that's kind of the beauty of beavers, is just how adaptable they are. You'll find them in northern Florida or Louisiana, and you'll find them in Alaska. They really cover pretty much the whole continent, and they're actually moving north now. As the climate warms in the tundra. Willows and other trees are kind of expanding their range north onto the kind of the formerly treeless tundra. And of course, beavers are following those willows, which are, one of their preferred food and building supplies. So, they're just incredibly adaptable animals that make a living in basically any situation, including very urban areas. There are beavers living in Seattle and, in the San Francisco Bay Area and the Bronx River. They're just incredibly adaptable creatures that do really well around humans. I think that's another surprising thing that people don't realize. We think about beavers as being this kind of wild animal that you'd have to go to Yellowstone National Park to see or something like that. But they're really just incredibly urban and suburban creatures. They'll live just about anywhere we'll let them live.
It's just that we need to learn how to look for them, right? So,
Yeah, we need to learn how to listen to them, and we need to learn how to coexist with them and tolerate them. That's really important too.
well, I understand you call beavers a keystone species. I'd love for you to explain what that is and why they're one of those.
Sure. So the term keystone species is really borrowed from architecture. If you can picture, a big stone arch, the keystone is that top block in the stone arch. And if you pull that block out, the whole arch crumbles. And in the same sense, keystone species are animals that disproportionately support a whole ecosystem. And beavers fit that definition perfectly. That by building these dams and creating these ponds and wetlands, they're forming habitat for all kinds of other creatures. We know that in the American West, especially, right, water is life. Wetlands cover just 2% or so of the total land area, but they support about 80% of the biodiversity. So any animal that can build and maintain and create new wetlands is really important. And it's almost impossible to name a species that doesn't benefit from beavers. Of course, fish, trout, and salmon do really well in and around beaver complexes, living in those nice deep pools and kind of slow water refuge habitats. There are lots of amphibians, frogs and toads and salamanders that breed and rear in beaver ponds. Waterfowl, ducks, wading birds like herons are super happy near beavers. Then you've got other semi-aquatic mammals like moose and muskrat and mink and otter, all hanging out in beavers. And you've got things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, like bats. Bats love coming down to get a drink off the surface of a beaver pond, or eat the aquatic insects that hatch off the beaver pond. All of those midges and mayflies. So they're really creating and supporting these vast interconnected ecosystems, and they're just a hugely important animal.
I was surprised about the bats. Who would have thought bats would benefit as well? Because you don't really think about that all these animals with such diversity would really rely on beavers.
Yeah, it's and I mean, every single time you go to a beaver complex, there's some kind of new connection to observe. A couple of quick stories. This past summer, I was in Utah, checking out some beaver ponds with Joe Wheaton, who's a great beaver scientist at Utah State University, and we saw this sandhill crane walking along the lip of a beaver dam. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I've never seen a sandhill crane in a around a beaver pond before. So I took some pictures, and then later, I posted the pictures on social media, and somebody said, hey, look at the crane's feet. And so you zoom in, and at the crane's feet is a little nest with 2 eggs that the crane had actually laid on top of the beaver dam, which is pretty incredible. And that's not the kind of thing that you would necessarily find in a scientific study, but it's just amazing to see. Another cool example was a few years ago. I was in Vermont at a beaver complex, and one of the great things that beavers do is they open up the forest canopy, right? It's, you have these really dense, kind of dark, almost homogeneous forests, and then beavers cut down those trees and they allow light to hit the forest floor and permit the growth of all kinds of understory plants that you wouldn't necessarily see otherwise. So in this case, beavers had opened up that forest canopy, and there was all of this jewelweed, these little orange flowers sprouting, in this wetland that beavers had created. And there were dozens and dozens of hummingbirds feeding on the jewelweed. And it was sort of like, wow. I mean, again, this is, I've never seen a study linking beavers with hummingbirds, but when you're actually there seeing these connections, they're just unmistakable, and you realize how much life springs up in the presence of beavers. It's incredibly exciting.
Well, let's talk about how North America was initially when settlers came here and there were all these beavers. How many were there, and what did that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't know how many beavers lived in North America before the fur trade, but the best guess is that there were as many as 400 million beavers. And of course, all of those beavers would have built dams and created ponds and wetlands, and again, we don't know exactly how many beaver ponds there were, but probably a couple hundred million. And certainly that there were many, many, many millions of acres of ponds and wetlands, and there's just no question that the continent was once so much greener and bluer and wetter and lusher than it is today. There are just amazing accounts of explorers, trying to cross what is today Indiana and not finding a dry place to camp for 100 miles because beavers have just kind of ponded everything up, or Lewis and Clark describing beaver dams in every tributary they passed, as far as the eye could see, up to the base of the mountains, or, explorers and trappers talking about crossing, northern Utah or southeastern Wyoming, places that are desert today, and finding these incredibly rich marshes full of ducks and geese, and that was just the work of the beaver. So, there's just no doubt that this was once a much more water and life-filled continent, thanks to these animals.
How did the Blackfeet Indian feel about beavers?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that's this is I'm borrowing this from Rosalind Lapierre, who's a great Blackfeet ethnographer and historian and botanist. But there were a number of tribes like the Blackfeet who are based in Montana, that sanctified the beavers, that revered the beavers, because they understood that, hey, in this kind of arid Western climate, here is this animal that creates these amazing watering holes for elk and bison and other game species. So the Blackfeet really sanctified the beavers and had cultural prohibitions against killing beavers, which is why, as the industrial fur trade kind of spread west across the country, back east where there's a fair amount of water, native tribes generally participated in the fur trade, and they caught beavers and traded them with white people for pots and knives and other goods. But as the fur trade reached the American West, a number of tribes refused to participate because, again, they knew how important beavers were, which is why you have, the mountain men, guys like, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, Jedediah Smith, all of these white guys all of a sudden going to trap beavers because, Western native people wouldn't do their dirty work for them because they knew how important these animals were.
So as we look at how that's all come together with the killing of beavers, at one point, were they on the extinction list?
Yeah, I mean, they were very close to extinction. The fur trade kind of began in the early 1600s in New England and very rapidly spread west across the continent. And by the middle of the 19th century, by 1840 or so, it's almost impossible to find a beaver in the lower 48. In the contiguous United States. There are still 100,000 of them or so left, but they're pretty much all up in Canada, in really inaccessible boreal forest, places where people can't really go. But yeah, I mean, if you had tried to find it, if you tried to find a beaver in 1850 in the US, you would have had a very, very hard time because they were functionally extinct across most of their range. And it's hard to overstate the extent to which that industrial fur trade, the wiping out of several 100 million beavers, was really this ecological catastrophe, right? I mean, what happens when you kill all of those beavers? Well, all of those beaver dams break down, all of those lush, rich beaver ponds and wetlands drain, and so many species would have lost critical habitat, from cutthroat trout to moose, to wood ducks, to various species of butterflies whose caterpillars only eat the sedges in beaver wetlands. We don't really think about fur trapping in the same terms as we think about, the deforestation of New England or gold mining in the Sierra Nevada or overgrazing in the American West. We don't think about beaver trapping as being this kind of early ecological catastrophe, but there's no question that it was.
So what were the beavers being killed for? I mean, why did we have all this fur?
Yeah, they're being killed for hats primarily. I think people hear the phrase beaver hat and think of like a big fluffy kind of Davy Crockett like thing, but beaver hat they're really these kind of elegant, sort of Victorian style top hats that were all the rage back in Europe, and beavers make such good hats because they have two layers of fur. They've got kind of the outer guard hairs, which are sort of the longer, coarse hairs, and then they've got a second layer of fur called the under fur, or the beaver wool, as the trappers called it, which is this really, really dense layer of hairs, very waterproof. And if you look at those little under hairs under a microscope, you see that each little hair has a small hook or barb at the end. So when you turn that fur into felt, all of those little hairs kind of lock together like Velcro, and create this really durable, malleable, waterproof hat material, this hat felt. So beavers made the best hats, and that was primarily why the Europeans wanted them. And again, it's just really hard to overemphasize how significant this, relentless pursuit of pelts was in early American history. I mean, practically every important event, from the Louisiana Purchase to the American Revolution to the War of 1812, had some kind of beaver resource connection. It's just this incredibly valuable economic resource that Europeans went to really great lengths to obtain.
Yeah, I in your book you talk about how they use mercury nitrate to a solution to get the hats to that place, and I was just shocked by that.
Yeah, and that's where the phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from. Is the use of all that mercury, causing neurological disorders in the people who used that substance to felt up these hats. And there's still many rivers where there's a layer of that stuff, deep in the sediment. This incredible toxic chemical legacy of the hat industry.
So when were beavers reintroduced in the US?
Yeah, it kind of happens in fits and starts in the early 1900s. You've got a bunch of states all over the country sort of saying at the same time, "Oh, wait a second, these are some really useful, valuable animals that we were mistaken in wiping out decades ago." So, a bunch of different states start to reintroduce beavers in the early 20th century. They're mostly using Canadian animals, because again, there are still some beavers in Canada, or beavers from Yellowstone National Park, where a few have survived the fur trade. So you've got lots of places. New York released a bunch of beavers in I believe 1906, and those just proliferated wildly. They did really well because they'd also lost their predators, right? People had killed all of the wolves and cougars and bears and other animals that would have eaten beavers. So once beavers get reintroduced, they do really well. They're also so good, of course, at creating their own habitat, right? That's a really valuable beaver trait that allows them to recover quickly, as they can create the conditions for their own flourishing. And then you've got West Coast states too, over time, Oregon, California, Utah, Idaho, all kind of bringing beavers back. So all throughout the kind of the period, let's say, 1900 to 1940 or 50, you've got beavers coming back in kind of fits and starts all over the country.
So what are some of the human beaver conflicts that occur?
Yeah, human beaver conflicts are sort of, there's all manner of human beaver conflicts, and that's and that really begins to happen in the 20th century, where beavers are coming back. And they're kind of recolonizing some of their former habitats, but in their absence, of course, we've colonized all of those same habitats, right? Beavers and humans, we both like the same places. We like these, broad, fertile floodplains, and we like low gradient stream corridors. That's where beavers build their dams, and that's where humans put our roads and railroads and power lines and towns and farms. And as beavers kind of come back into this landscape, human beaver conflict becomes really frequent and problematic. A few kind of archetypal conflicts. Of course, beavers cut down trees, right? So they cut down people's ornamental trees, or if you're an apple farmer, beavers really like apple trees. So that they cut down orchards, and of course they do lots of flooding, right? They're building dams in farmers' irrigation ditches. They're damming in road culverts and washing out roads. They're flooding people's fields and driveways. And I'd argue that we're kind of the nuisance species more than they are. They're just doing what they do, in the places that they had lived for millions of years. But there's no question that these can be tricky animals to live with at times, and that's sort of what humans find out in the 20th century, is that, hey, these are animals that we're going to have to learn to deal with somehow.
Have we come up with solutions that would prevent them from plugging up culverts or washing out roads?
Yeah, we definitely have. Look, the vast majority of the time that beavers cause a conflict, our solution still today is to kill the offending beaver, get the beaver out of there with a trap or a gun. And that makes a certain, intuitive amount of sense, right? The beaver's causing a problem. get the beaver out of there. But the problem with that is sort of twofold. I mean, first, when you kill the beaver, of course, you're eliminating the possibility for that great pond and wetland habitat creation that we care about so much. But also, all you're doing is putting up a kind of a vacancy sign for the next family of beavers, right? Beavers are, they disperse widely. They're really territorial. They're always looking for an opening, a good place to live. And if that place is a road culvert, they're always going to come back and cause conflict again. So there are all of these communities all over the country that are engaged in these very expensive and inhumane cycles of trapping and recolonization and trapping and recolonization, just, kind of forever at war with beavers. But fortunately, there are better ways of doing business. There's a kind of the best solution is this thing called a flow device. Often you hear it called a beaver deceiver, which is basically this pipe and fence system that drains the pond, right? So let's say a beaver moves into your moves onto your property, builds a dam, creates a big pond, and all of a sudden that pond is flooding your driveway, or flooding your crops if you're a farmer, and you say, well, look, I can't tolerate this. I need my land is underwater right now. I don't like that. But I don't want to kill the beavers. So maybe I'll put in one of these flow devices, one of these beaver deceivers, to basically drop the level of that pond so that it's off of my driveway or off my crops, but the beavers still have enough water there to, do their thing and make a living. So you basically, you take one of these pipes and you kind of pass it, through the beaver dam or into the road culvert if the conflict is at a culvert. And you put little fences or cages around each end of the pipes. The beavers can't plug the pipe up, and you're just the pipe is just moving water from the upstream side to the downstream side, right? It's basically like a leak in the dam that's dropping that water level to a place where both beavers and humans can tolerate. And there have been lots of studies showing that this kind of non-lethal solution works really well, and it's really cost effective, right? By putting in one of these flow devices, you don't have to hire a trapper every single year to take care of those beavers. You put it in once, it costs, let's say a couple $1,000 up front, and the problem is basically solved in perpetuity. So again, lots of studies showing that these kinds of non-lethal solutions are really effective. And there are certainly many, many thousands of places where we're killing beavers right now, where we could be coexisting with them instead and kind of reaping all of those environmental benefits that we care about so much.
There's so much that the beavers do. I was so impressed with your book and the work that you've done. One of the things I'd love for you to explain is how beavers stabilize droughts and floods.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and really probably the reason that beavers are so hot right now, is their ability to kind of regulate stream flows and help us adapt to extreme weather. It's especially a big problem here in the American West, right? In states like Colorado, where I live, or Washington, where I used to live, or California, where we're losing our snowpack, right? As climate change, the climate gets warmer, precipitation is falling as rain instead of snow, and when it falls as snow, it's this great reservoir essentially, right? It very gradually melts throughout the summer, and it sort of gradually lets cold water trickle back into our rivers and streams and irrigation ditches. But when we, as we've warmed the climate and that precipitation falls as rain instead of snow, it just runs off the landscape right away, right? And we don't have that nice gradual melt from our snowpack. So you start to think, well, if the climate is getting warmer and we're losing our snow, maybe there's some other way to keep all of that water up in the mountains. Maybe there's an animal who can build thousands of little reservoirs for us and store that water and gradually release it, in the form of sort of surface water or groundwater, right? Beavers are sort of forcing lots of water into the ground as well, and hydrating soils and recharging aquifers and raising the water table. So that idea that beavers can kind of keep water on the land and in our streams, throughout the hot, dry season, I think that's a really big part of why these animals have become so popular, right? Because beavers, they're not stealing the water, they're not taking the water, they're just slowing the water down with all of those dams and ensuring that there still is water in the stream, come July or August, right? The hot season. There are lots of great stories of beavers basically taking these seasonal streams, streams that had been going dry in the summer and making them perennial streams, letting them flow all year round by storing that water and slowing it down. So that's kind of the drought piece. The flood piece is similar, right? In lots of places, like New England, states like Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as in Europe, where Eurasian beavers have been reintroduced. The problem isn't drought, it's really flood, right? You get these really intense rainstorms due to climate change, and you get these kind of gathering pulses of stormwater racing down rivers and overspilling banks in cities and towns and doing lots of damage. And beavers can kind of help us tackle that problem too, right? All of those beaver ponds and wetlands slow that water down. They capture it, they spread it out sideways onto the floodplain so it can soak into the ground. They just capture these big extreme rain events. And as a result, they really mitigate flooding that way. And there have been lots of great studies, often set in England and Scotland, these really wet, rainy places, showing that beavers are great flood managers. So I think that's, kind of amazing to contemplate, right? You've got drought on one hand, flooding on the other hand. They're kind of seemingly these polar opposite problems. But beavers can kind of help us tackle both of them by, regulating very unstable stream flows. So, beavers are kind of magical that way, I think.
I would say they are, And it was interesting. I was just kind of, there's so much in your book that was just like, maybe go, wow. And one was talking about how, and I'm probably going to mess this up, how beavers can also remove certain toxins from the water.
Yeah, that's another wonderful beaver benefit, right? Is that you've got, imagine a stream that's, racing along. It's carrying all of this pollution in it. It's got nitrates and phosphates from agriculture that have kind of rushed off into the stream. It's got, it's got herbicides and pesticides. Maybe it's got, heavy metals from historic mining upstream. It's carrying all of this pollution. And then it reaches a beaver pond, and all of that water slows down, and it gives a chance for all of those suspended pollutants to settle out of the water column, to drop to the bottom of that pond, and then get captured by many subsequent, layers of sediment that the pond is storing. So, that's that ability to capture pollution, especially agricultural runoff, all of that nitrogen and phosphorus. That's a really big part of why beavers are being restored now in places like the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. A kind of a body of water that's severely impacted by all of this agriculture. Every summer in the Chesapeake Bay, there's this big dead zone that forms because all of this, nitrogen and phosphorus pollution is running off into the Chesapeake Bay and fertilizing these big algae blooms that suck up all the oxygen as they die. So you start to think, well, maybe there's a way to capture a lot of that agricultural pollution before it reaches the bay, and prevent that dead zone from forming. And beavers, by creating these little pollution settling ponds, are doing exactly that. And again, lots and lots of great studies, showing that beavers have this wonderful pollution control benefit. I think that's one of the important things to remember too, is that this is all of these beaver benefits that I'm describing. I mean, these aren't things that, beaver advocates are just sort of like waving their hands and making up. I mean, these are all benefits that have been really rigorously and repeatedly documented in peer-reviewed scientific studies. So the facts definitely have a pro-beaver bias. It's not just, beaver lovers making stuff up.
Do you ever get people reaching out going, okay, I've got I have this big property and I want to introduce beavers into my property?
Yeah, definitely. But I hear a lot about that. Or if not introduce them, how can I encourage them? What can I do to help beavers show up? And I think that, look, all they're looking for is water and wood, right? That's their how they make their living. And if you have that healthy, riparian or stream-side vegetation, those willows or cottonwoods or beaches or whatever. I mean, what they're looking for kind of depends on where you are. But if you have a stream that's connected to other streams and good food and building supplies for them on site. They're likely to show up sooner or later.
So do beavers also help to fight fires?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's something that there's not much in my book about that, right? My book was published back in 2018, before a lot of the great fire beaver science came out. But in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of really wonderful studies, mostly by a woman named Emily Fairfax, a great scientist in California, basically showing that beavers are fantastic firefighters. You can sort of imagine water doesn't burn, right? And by spreading water out, beavers are creating these wonderful fire refuges or even fire breaks, places where the fire burns down to the edge of the pond or wetland and kind of stops in its tracks in some cases. And it's not just that beavers are spreading water out, they're also great irrigators, right? They're by hydrating the soils and digging all of these canals that kind of disperse water across the landscape. They're irrigating all of these plants, and as a result, the plants around a beaver pond are green and wet and lush. Instead of being dry and brown and crispy, and as a result, they're much less flammable in the presence of beavers. So that's a big thing too, right? Beavers are spreading water out and they're irrigating plants and thus creating these wonderful little fire breaks on the landscape. So there have been some really, really good studies basically showing this wonderful kind of fire refuge effect where, you get a big wildfire, burning all the hill slopes, and you've got all of these animals, and in some cases, livestock or even people, trying to escape this fire. Where do they go? They go to the beaver pond, where the fire doesn't really touch, and they're able to ride out that fire, around the beaver complex, and then after the fire is gone, they can kind of repopulate the landscape. And in fact, the fire beaver connection is so strong that in one of her really great studies describing this effect, Emily Fairfax proposed that the Forest Service change its mascot from Smokey Bear to Smokey Beaver. So if there are any Forest Service personnel listening to this show, I think you should take that into consideration. That maybe Smokey Beaver should be your emblem.
I'm sure they're thinking about that right now.
I hope so.
Well, and so we've been talking a lot about the US, but there's also been an issue in Scotland and UK, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, so there are two species of beavers. There's the North American beaver, Castor canadensis, that's what we have here. And there's the Eurasian beaver, Castor fiber, that lives in Europe and Asia. And that the Eurasian beaver had a very similar trajectory, where they were kind of trapped out much earlier than North American beavers. They came even closer to extinction than our beavers did. There were at one point by 1900 or so, there were only about 1,000 beavers left in all of Europe. Mostly in France, Germany, and Russia, I think. But in recent years, their population has really been increasing. And one of the places where they've been reintroduced is England and Scotland. And again, it's primarily for that flood control benefit. Of course, the UK is a very rainy place. They've had a lot of destructive flooding in recent years, and beavers can kind of help capture those floodwaters. And there have been a number of really great releases in England and Scotland. Some kind of authorized by the government, some kind of under the table, beaver lovers just sort of turning them loose. Not everybody is a fan of beavers in Scotland, that's for sure. But, again, there have been, there's been all kinds of great studies showing that beavers are increasing biodiversity in England and Scotland and capturing all of this flood water and, and really doing a lot of good just as they are here.
Who knew that they were being released quietly? That's actually pretty hysterical if you think about it. But it's so important because these environments really need to have them there.
Definitely, yeah. I think that what the people who have kind of covertly released beavers would say is that, look, we don't really have time to wait around, to go through all of the official channels, right? That we are in this ecological crisis right now. The climate is warming. Extinctions are happening every day. We're subject to all of this destructive flooding and drought. and we don't have time to kind of sit on our hands and and wait for this issue to go through the proper channels. We need to get these animals out on the landscape right now. And I think that what they've been proven correct in a lot of ways. I think that having the beavers out there sort of forced governments in both England and Scotland to say, okay, fine. If there are, we were going to drag our heels and take forever, but they're already out there, so we might as well, let them stay and kind of recognize them as a native beneficial species. So I think that the kind of the covert beaver releasers have been largely vindicated in the UK.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, what do you want readers and our listeners to take away from your book?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marianne. I think we've been talking about it. The immense value of this animal. How much we lost when we eliminated beavers. In the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and how much good they can do for us now if we learn to tolerate them and live with them and coexist. I think that I also love when people just recognize how special these creatures are. I like one of my favorite outcomes from my book is that I heard recently from a couple who'd been living in Boston, and they read the book and they said, "Wow, these animals are incredible. We just want to be around them." And they actually bought a house in Western Massachusetts on a beaver pond, and kind of like reoriented their lives to be around these creatures. And that's just so gratifying for me, because these animals, as I said earlier, they're so relatable. They're so sympathetic in so many ways. They're so much fun to observe. And the other great thing too about going to a beaver pond is that, even if you don't see beavers themselves, you're going to see something cool, because so much life congregates around beaver ponds. You're going to see a great blue heron or a bald eagle or a mink or, some kind of neat creature that you wouldn't see otherwise. So, I think that if people read this book and just want to spend more time in the company of these animals and on the landscapes that they create, I think that's a fantastic outcome.
So, Ben, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book, Eager, and be part of your community?
Yeah, they can certainly check out my website, which is bengoldfarb.com, or my Twitter, which is Ben A. Goldfarb. I'd also, my publisher would probably be annoyed if I didn't mention that I have another book coming out this year called Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet, which is basically about all of the ways in which roads, from the biggest interstate highways to the littlest dirt logging roads, change our landscape and mostly negatively impact wildlife, and what can we do about that? How can we manage our infrastructure in a more ecologically sensible and sustainable way? So if you read Eager and are inspired to check out Crossings, I'd be really grateful as well.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks, Marianne. I appreciated all of your great questions, and thanks to all of your listeners for engaging.
Well, thank you, Ben. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Eager: The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. Eager is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. And of course, support our indie bookstores. You can also purchase this book directly from the publisher, Chelsea Green Publishing, at chelseagreen.com. On that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1, 2, 3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.